further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Najat, one of our local councillors. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Simin. I've not got a PowerPoint presentation, so you'll have to put up with prehistoric ways of presentation. But we have got a very nice leaflet about greening Wingrove, which gives a sort of synopsis of what a fairly complicated initiative is about. So those are down here by the pastries, so do pick one up. And yesterday we relaunched the Greening Wingrove website. So if you just, the address is on here, but if you just Google Greening Wingrove, it'll come up. So that is fresh off the whatever websites are fresh off from. Simon said I'm a city councillor in Newcastle for an area or ward that's called Wingrove. It's where I live as well. I guess if I place myself on Simon's political spectrum, it's somewhere towards the Kropotkin end. So that might become apparent as we describe Greening Wingrove. Greening Wingrove is essentially a resident-led initiative to try to green and clean a set of inner city neighbourhoods, not far from here really. So if you go down the road to Spittletongues, that's where it starts, over past the BBC, up to Brighton Grove, the terraces in Arthur's Hill, a couple of social housing estates on the edge of there, and then over the other way, going westwards around Wingrove Road, part of suburban Fenham, so some terrace streets, some semi-detached streets. It has about, never quite sure what our actual population is, it's about sort of 10 to 15,000 people, I suppose, of which about 2,000 are students, as Cussell Lees's Hall of Residence is in the area. There are many other students who live out about in the wider community. It's a very socially diverse place. Ethnically, it's probably the most diverse area in the northeast. The last census revealed that almost half the population come from all sorts of points on the planet, but chiefly Pakistan, Bangladesh, the Middle East, China, refugees from West Africa, and now increasingly migrants from Slovakia and other parts of Eastern Europe. It's a very transitory place in a sense. But some parts of those populations have now been there for 2 or probably 3 generations, so a lot of British Asian young people in the area as well. In social class terms, it's also very diverse. So we have one of the richest streets in Newcastle, and we also have some of the poorest. Fuel poverty statistics, when we had them, were really very high across the area. So we've got quite a spread of incomes in the area. A lot of people earning their living also in either professional occupations. There's quite a large young professional and older professional population in the area, but also many people, particularly in the Asian communities, who earn their livings in restaurants and driving taxis, so a very precarious, low-paid occupation for many of them. And if you, I suppose, put it in the white working class population, again, a mirror image, really, of all of that. Place is organised in a set of different neighbourhoods, some of which I've described. Whether there's neighbourhood identity always there is perhaps more open to debate. Where Greening Wingrove really began was about 5 or 6 years ago, I guess, when some of us who lived there just got fed up with living in Newcastle's litter mountain. Actually, we're not the worst area in Newcastle for litter, but we did attract, in the Clean for the Queen sort of nonsense that Country Life magazine invented. We were one of 12 neighbourhoods around the country to be given the Clean for the Queen Grot Spot Award, thanks to one of our residents who nominated us.
Must have been a highlight of your career, now.
Absolutely, yes. rather not have had that, but it is an endemic problem that's been there for decades and seems to be have been getting worse in some respects, but certainly not better. So, and we're not the only bit of the West End, or indeed parts of the East End, that have that. But some of us got really fed up with it and thought we must try and do something about it. At which point we spent 18 months getting absolutely nowhere with anybody because there was such cynicism and disillusion. And litter is not something that, by and large, gets people kind of moving in a way. But to cut a long story short, a number of us, residents, local councillors, people who work for different kinds of voluntary or council agencies in the area, one night had a meeting, and we invented the concept greening Wingrove. And really it was something we got actually from Vancouver on the internet about how people there had attempted to solve a problem. And what struck us about what was going on in Vancouver, I won't go into it in detail, but essentially it was a different way of looking at a set of inner city problems. So you look at it through a green lens rather than through particular problems. And there was real enthusiasm that came out then for growing. It's clear that there were people interested in growing things, in recycling rainwater, in all sorts of sort of environmental initiatives. And it was that really got people going. We had some council money through the council's ward committees, which we put into a participatory budgeting exercise, and had 3 very big community meetings, one of which dispersed that money into a range of community projects. And that gave Greening Wingrove the beginnings of a sort of substance to it. And then we won the lottery. The big lottery invented a regime called Communities Living Sustainably, which is described on the back of the leaflet. And that was to enable 12 neighbourhoods in England to test out ways in which neighbourhoods could respond to the impacts of climate change. And again, to cut a longish story short, we were one of the neighbourhoods that won. Actually, the thing was almost written for us. It was kind of uncanny. So that gave us just short of £1 million over 4 years to spend on a range of things. Quite a big focus on reducing people's energy costs. So it didn't quite overlap with some of the preoccupations of the informal residence group that had been at the centre of this. But converting that informal residence group into a community cooperative and using community interest company constitution meant that we also had another way in which we could raise funds for the other things that the lottery initially weren't that happy at touching. The community co-op now has about 160 members in individual residents or organisations in the area, an elected board. It's into its 3rd year, really, of operation as a distinct organisation. It's run a number of projects itself, quite apart from what the lottery-funded project also run. And it's currently doing business planning and envisioning the way in which the KIC, as we call it, will become the legacy vehicle from the lottery funding to make sure that we carry on with a sustainable organisation to make the area greener and cleaner in lots of ways. So in many respects it's been a good news story, I think, in terms of setting up that organisation. Why a co-op? Well, firstly because it ties us into cooperative values, that you do things for community benefit and for social responsibility. It also puts the ownership of the organisation and any assets it acquires in the control of people who live in the area where the thing operates, which is, going back to 2 points Keith made earlier on, it's something we've learned from the experience of some previous regeneration schemes. They're there when the money is there, and they're gone when the money is gone. But we're going to be there forever, probably, and so we want to make sure that the organisation and the initiative is secure in the area too. I think really perhaps just to come back to the kinds of things we've done. We have embarked on a campaign of challenging litter and rest of it, and also trying to revitalise some aspects of community cohesion, and I think Dave Webb might touch on some of that in terms of the terrific work he's been doing with some groups in the area as well. We've also discovered in the process of what we've been doing that we have this real gem called Nunsmore Park, which in city council terms is a kind of outlier, slightly neglected, small park. For us, it's people keep telling us it's the heart of our area. And so a lot of what we do now and in the future is about revitalising aspects of that park. And we've got volunteers and others who've brought a fire-damaged pavilion, Bowling Green Pavilion, back into use as a community hub. And we've also got a team of volunteers and others working on developing a community garden on what was the bowling green in there. So it's increasingly well used. So in a way, people are responding from, interestingly, from a variety of different backgrounds across the various population groups into, because we always thought that one way of bringing people together in an area where different population groups tend to live in their own silos is to recognise the fact that everybody likes to eat things, and within each population group there are usually people who like to grow things, and so the greening and growing has been an important strand of I suppose community building really within that. Just to come back to the theme of this session, which is really looking at, I suppose, local governance and the constraints that operate on it. I could just mention some of the opportunities. I'll just focus now on mentioning some of those. Simin mentioned the importance of the market in this. It's hugely important to us, particularly in terms of housing. We have over, we think, between 400 and 500 private landlords active in our area, many of them with one or two properties and others. Nearly all of them with little expertise in managing and maintaining properties. Most of them interested really in the money they get from it. And increasingly lettings agencies that are active in that field, probably driven by that ultimate weapon for destabilising communities called buy-to-let that governments and banks have so loved. So that presents real difficulty because it means that the way that housing market works creates a rootless transitory population. It also sucks money out of the area and interestingly recycles public money in other ways, because this sector is massively subsidised by all of us through housing benefit. So each year those landlords, or those who into the housing benefit system, get about £2.5 million in housing benefit, 5 million over 2 years, and you can do the multipliers. But you'd struggle to see a fraction of that reflected in improved housing management and maintenance. So there are big issues in there, but it's really difficult to engage them. They won't come to meetings, they won't talk to you, they just have a very narrow, blinkered way of looking at their business that doesn't take the wider community setting into account. So that's one of our challenges, one of the things that a constraint, I suppose. We also have what she is now, this woman from Northumberland who talked about landowners in Maggie, yeah. I mean, we have this medieval institution called the Freemen of Newcastle, who control most of the town law and several local allotments. And although we found a way initially of work, so mostly big green space apart from the park in our area is controlled by them. Not accountable. They're not accountable to anybody in any real way. We did achieve a bit of a working relationship with them when we were setting up Greening Wingrove, but they're capable of completely pulling the rug from under your feet. So if you go along Brighton Grove at the moment and look at a desolate patch where the allotments used to be, you can see really the appalling environmental vandalism that they're absolutely capable of, because they couldn't manage the allotments because of internal conflict and other things. There's a lovely line in Mary Beard's book, SPQR, where she begins by quoting a Roman critic of Caesar's invasion of Britain. And what he said was, they created desolation and called it peace. And that's really what the Freemen tend to do and have done massively with the allotments. So they're a real problem, and they have such idiosyncratic leadership that it's difficult to deal with them. The other, I suppose, things that structure the situation are some crucial city council services, particularly neighbourhood services, so street cleaning, rubbish collection, enforcement, that kind of thing. Unfortunately, the city council, despite a slight swerve towards trying to decentralise its management of some of those services a few years ago, has now swerved back into a highly centralised thing. So what they tend to do, their culture, is to do things to people rather than with people. And so our ongoing dialogue and argument with them is they're only going to be effective and achieve their aims as well as the communities if they do things with us. But I must say it's hard work really with them. less hard work with the Parks Service, because they're so denuded by cuts that they're grateful for anybody who does anything to help maintain or improve the park. But actually their whole culture really is of they're in the jobs because they're highly committed to parks. Don't always quite know how to work with people, but they're willing to make the effort, which is a very different approach to some other bits of the City Council. So we've had, must say, a very good relationship with them. They're sometimes a bit slow at doing things, but when they do them, they get there in the end. The big question mark for us is that the future management of Newcastle's parks, and indeed this is true across England, is likely to change radically, and we don't know exactly what direction it will change in, because really the money for parks is running out. So every councillor's got to find another way of generating income to maintain the parks. At the moment, Newcastle's parks are heavily subsidised by the Director of Public Health since that service came into the council, on the grounds that parks are good for health. So he's put a lot of money into it, but that won't be there for much longer, we think. So those are kind of constraints, but within that, just finally, there are lots of opportunities we've found for us. The opportunity of Green and Wingrove has unlocked a huge amount of community energy and people who want to do things. 2 years ago, if you tried to organise a litter pick, people would look at you as if you were completely off your head and totally eccentric. Now we've got regular large groups of residents going out litter picking, not with the expectation that it will keep the place clean, but really to demonstrate that something can be changed, that there are people who care about the area, and the conversations that are building up there. And one of the measures of success of this, though it'd be hard to make connection totally, is that if you go around the Arthur's Hill terraces, you'll now see many more small gardens in the narrow frontages of the terrace housing. Some are very minimalist gardens, some are very elaborate. But that is a measure, I think, of rising confidence in thinking, well, we can have pride in this place. You know, it's our place. We can make something of it. Similarly, with the park, although we have this unknown quantity of what the future of parks management will be about, we have been given by the council in writing almost a licence to do pretty much whatever we want in the park in terms of trying to generate income and activity, and that in a way is very important to us, I think, in terms of going to external funders, which is what we're about to do, in saying, well, we have got an authority to do things in the park. And there are lots of building blocks that are coming together in all sorts of ways. I mean, Dave might mention some of them, but for example, this week we're talking to the Newcastle Bangladeshi Association about whether they could support us in some ways in terms of raising some money to support the recreation of a friends group in the park that might also give people suffering from various kinds of ill health a sort of therapeutic opportunity to do like gardening in the park. Just need money really for things like gloves and tools and seeds and plants, waterproofs and those things. So it looks as though the Bangladeshi Association, when they have their massive Eid in the Park morning in a week or two's time, might allow us and support us in standing at the gates to the park with collecting buckets to raise money to fund this new initiative. So I'll probably come to an end there because I think I'm up against the time, except just to say all the issues that have been mentioned about conflict between residents, different points of view and so on, they're all there with us. It's another challenge to, our ambition really is to become the local unit of local self-governance in various ways. But that will put us in a position where numbers of people involved with the KIC, particularly on its board, then find themselves having to take decisions about choices, really. And one group of residents who want to cut down a hedge for their own safety without considering the implications for other things or other people, those choices will have to be made, and they'll be difficult, really, in that context. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I suppose Dave is going to sort of continue along those lines. Yes, an academic in the community, we called his